So this module covers a few mindset and cognitive strategies related to surviving the holiday events. The first is to check in with your expectations, and in particular to ensure that you're being realistic. It won't serve you well if you expect yourself to be calm or expect yourself to be able to just eat how you'd ideally like to eat, when perhaps that's not where you're at in your recovery. So this step is related to checking in with yourself and asking, am I being realistic with what I'm expecting myself to do, how I expect myself to be, and how I'll manage my feelings during this event? Am I also expecting or being realistic with my expectations of other people at the event? So the first reflection is to check in whether there is a part of you that has high expectations of yourself in general, and so perhaps these expectations will also be applied to this situation. For example, you may be fairly early on in your eating disorder recovery, or you haven't seen lots of people for a very long time, so it may be unrealistic to expect that you should feel calm and be able to just eat everything with no anxiety or concern or pushback from your eating disorder. Realistically, the name of the game is to survive these events and to ideally feel more confident and positive with regards to how these things have all gone. So, we need to be careful that your unrealistic expectations do not set you up to fail. If the jump you expect yourself to do is bigger than what you've been making in your recovery progress, it may leave you feeling really disappointed with how things have gone, even if they may have objectively not gone too badly. So, in essence, if there's a part of you that is hoping and therefore expecting that things will go perfectly, or you should by now know exactly how to manage something or be comfortable with something, but those expectations are not realistic, then I'd like you to consider what those expectations are in service of, and are they ultimately helping you with your end goal. The second reflection is related to your expectations of other people. Because sometimes we may also have unrealistic expectations of what other people will do or how they'll be, both in a positive and negative way. So for example, there may be the expectation that if your family loved you, they would all do the right thing related to comments and food judgments and discussions, etc., and eating behaviours. And so unfortunately, if they don't do this, it can feel very disappointing and hurtful. However, perhaps if we unpacked each of your family members' own relationship with food and body, or just what they have going on, or what capacity they have for things that are difficult or require change, then we may realise that unfortunately a realistic expectation of their behaviour may mean they're just not able at the moment to support you the way that you need. And maybe that's okay, as it may not mean that they'll never get there one day. Alternatively, you may also have an expectation that everyone will do things to be hurtful or trigger your disorder. And in fact, it may be unrealistic to anticipate this from everyone at the event, because maybe it's more realistic to only have it be something that typically comes from Uncle Mick and not everyone else. With this step for being realistic in our expectations of ourselves and others, it can be really helpful to write specific things down and then have a chance to step back and reflect. So if you're someone who likes to journal, then there may be enough prompts from what I have just mentioned to write some things down. Otherwise, if you'd like more guidance, I've included a worksheet that may be helpful to complete as well. The second mindset strategy is to see if we can reframe people's comments. Some of what I've been discussing in this series is that we can experience unhelpful comments from people around us at holiday events, as it can be a time for getting together with people we haven't seen for a long time, or also due to the context and the amount of food, or just the time of year, with it being summer in Australia and the diet advertising really kicking in at the end of the year and the beginning of every year. So, considering how we may do some mental acrobatics to help ourselves lessen the impact of people's comments can be very helpful. If we jump back to the example of Grandma Crystal from the previous module, where the moment she comes in, she comments on everyone's bodies and whether they've gained, lost, or remained unchanged in their weight, let's now consider some cognitive strategies which may help soothe us in this situation. So here are 3 things to consider which may help you navigate tricky conversations and comments from your Grandma Crystal. 1. Most people are doing their best. So in this way, they may think they're being helpful somehow. So given that typically we may be spending the holiday events with people we know who are friends or family or work colleagues, most of them, if you were to think about it, may be saying these unhelpful things while coming from a place of love, care and concern. So one of the steps we can take at times is to consider, is this person thinking they're being helpful? Are they ultimately showing me they care and are concerned? If so, maybe it's just that they don't know better, or this is how they express their concern, or perhaps they're unlikely to change, but ultimately they are doing their best to care for me in some way. So this one could apply to Grandma Crystal in that she's probably unlikely to change as she's a little too old. But she just honestly doesn't think she's saying anything to upset someone. Now, this doesn't mean that if you're feeling upset or hurt or anxious by someone's comments, that your feelings are not valid. They are in fact very valid, but it's more an attempt to see whether considering that someone is coming from a place of care and support softens the negative impact it has on you. The second strategy is to depersonalize. So to consider, how is this not actually about me? And therefore, how might it actually be about the other person? What might it be telling me about them? This strategy is a fantastic one in general in our lives, but specifically related to surviving the holiday season. It may help you to see that perhaps the person making the comments is themselves struggling with their own disordered eating or their own body image issues, or is feeling triggered by something or feeling anxious about something, and then ends up making negative comments in your direction as a way to manage that for themselves. Or perhaps it's a reflection of the time and era in which they grew up, where they themselves were on the receiving end of such comments and questions and were taught to just accept it and tolerate it. So this one in particular could be very helpful with regards to Grandma Crystal. She's from an era where this happened all of the time, and in fact is what happened to her. It may also be possible that Grandma is herself feeling nervous about coming to the family event, not that she'd ever acknowledge that, and so she just says things to take the focus off her, and may have been used to doing that as a standard conversation as a way to survive these events for herself. You may even consider that perhaps Grandma Crystal has had her own struggles with body and eating, and perhaps even had her own eating disorder, but in her time no one really talked about it and she's never had any treatment. And although this again does not change the comments, they are still hurtful or inappropriate, it may help you to see that they are actually more an indication of what is happening for the other person and potentially less to do with you in reality. Again, the hope is that with this cognitive strategy that it may lessen the impact these negative or inappropriate comments have on you, and consequently that they don't impact your eating at this event. The third strategy is related to setting boundaries and affirming that you don't owe anyone more information or answers than you're willing to give, and you don't owe anyone having to stay in a distressing conversation. So, if despite your best preparation, use of strategies, you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, it is really important to affirm that you don't have to stay, you don't have to answer things if they don't feel comfortable to share, and you don't have to continue in conversations you're not comfortable with. So, if Grandma Crystal's comments upset you, you can go somewhere else or turn to someone else and just start talking about something completely different. The third and final mindset strategy is to stay in your own lane. I love this one as it speaks to the fact that we are wired to compare ourselves and see whether what we're doing fits in with what everyone else is doing. And yet a lot of the time the comparison game can end very poorly for us. And eating disorders in particular love comparing and fundamentally most times telling you that you are underperforming. So if possible, I invite you to consider how to keep yourself grounded in staying in your own lane, running your own race, not having to compare or compete with anyone, focusing on what is best for you during this time. Taking a breath and ensuring you keep true to your recovery goals, your progress at your own pace, not needing to do anything different. So when times become stressful, it can be interesting to notice what our minds and thoughts do in response. where we go, where our focus goes, who we focus on, what we start to focus on. And instead, it can be helpful to start practicing bringing ourselves back to this moment and where we're going with recovery, and therefore what's best for us to do right now. In the next module, I'll be talking about maybe the possibility of enjoying your meal through something like being very present and mindful.